so I'll pass over to Sam, our final speaker for tonight.
Hello everybody. Thank you very much for coming along. I'm going to talk about the art of custom UI controls. Now, a little bit about me and who I work for and that kind of thing. For those of you who can't see me, that's a picture of me. I don't know why only two of me, but never mind. I started life as a computer vision researcher, looking at kind of human visual system and perception and that kind of thing. I've now moved away from that. I now do mobile development, but you can check out my blog is i1.myreal.name, which has got some random stuff on, like how to build thermometers and that kind of thing, as you would, and on the Twitter as well, my GitHub. So as I said, I started out as a computer vision researcher, and then I moved to mobile development. I now work for ShinobiControls. We're based in the UK. We build UI controls, hence why I'm going to talk about how to build UI controls on the web and same kind of stuff as before. So I'm going to talk very briefly about what ShinobiControls does. I'm not going to try and sell you their stuff, but if you do want to look at it, if you are after it, then go and have a look. We have three main products. We have Charts, which is kind of graphing, OpenGL accelerated graphing, all kinds of different charts and things that you might want, including kind of wacky financial ones and that kind of thing. Tens, hundreds of thousands of data points. At the moment it's iOS only. In the next week, maybe 2 weeks, we'll have an Android version as well. Grids is for tabular data, so if you've got kind of random bits of data that you want to display so in iOS you can only have a table view. This allows you to have columns. It gives you sorting, gives you grouping, gives you loads of other stuff out of the box. Then Grids is the one to look for, and Essentials is a collection of more traditional UI controls, which are the kind of stuff I'm looking at in this talk. So it's things like being able to do a carousel, being able to do an accordion. None of this stuff's very difficult. The point of it is to take the effort out of the developer's life, so that in actual fact you're dealing with the content, you chuck it at it and it'll display it nicely for you. And then finally we've just launched Shinobi Labs, which has got some stuff in that we're kind of just playing around with and putting up. So if you're interested in any of that, check out ShinobiControls.com. If you want to see demos of it, then we've got an app on the App Store called Shinobi Play. This is iOS, so up onto Shinobi Play and you can have a look at that. I won't do any more random advertising. So I'm going to talk a little bit about UI controls. What should we talk about? So I'm going to talk about what they are and how you should go about designing them, including the user experience, good API, and then some software stuff as well. I should mention that I did this talk last week at 360 iDev, and it was quite a lot longer, so I've cut out loads of it. I'll tell you where you can get the original slides and things for a little bit more detail. What exactly are UI controls? Well, we all use them every day, and we all know exactly what they are. But if we try and nail down exactly what they are for, then they've got a little bit more of a question. They're there to help out various different groups of people. One of them is designers. Now, I don't know how many of you are designers, but the point of helping out designers with UI controls is if they've got a toolbox of things that they can use, when you're coming to design a new app, a new app for people to use, you haven't got to invent a new way of working. You can actually just grab something that you've already been using. And it also then gives a kind of common vocabulary to talk to developers. So a developer gets a new design, and actually, in fact, it's built with things that they already know that they have the code for. They haven't got to go off and build completely new things. And this, in turn, helps users. A user opens an app, they haven't got to go off and learn they haven't got to spend 10 minutes working out how the hell it works. They can use it because they're used to, if I want to select a date, then I'm used to seeing a particular date picker. So all of this kind of stuff is there to make everybody's lives a bit easier. So having said that, why the hell do we want to go custom, right? I've just explained why we have them and why we don't want to go custom. Well, we want the same kind of flexibility, i.e. we want to be able to have this code reuse, have this common vocabulary, have this ability to talk between people and people understand how to use it. But we don't want some kind of new functionality, i.e. the ones that we've been provided with aren't good enough, we want something extra. And I've just thrown some examples in at the bottom here. So we've got kind of, in iOS you can get a UI slider, but what if we want to actually set a range as opposed to just a single value? Well, you can't do that. You'd have to have two UI sliders. So maybe we want to make one with two values on it. We've got a kind of cover flow type thing there. got a cover flow thing there as well, so if we've got a load of things that we want to be able to show and people want to be able to flick through them, then that's not standard. It's standard on OS X, but it's not standard on iOS. And then charting as well, that's a perfect example of I want to reuse this, so that each time I want to show some data, I don't want to have to rewrite how to build a chart. So there's an example of that. So kind of an example I'm going to keep referring to when I'm talking about this is this kind of concept of this knob control. So based on the kind of sound desk thing you've got in the background, we've got this radial version of a slider, and I'm just going to keep referring to that, and there will be, I've got some code to demonstrate all of the things that I'm talking about. So UX design, what do I mean by that? I'm no UX expert, but I've been at the receiving end of quite a lot of UX. So, what exactly do I mean by some kind of UX design? Well, before we start getting on with building it, and this is very much from the point of view of being able to reuse it, as opposed to, if all I'm going to do is use it in one app, then I can just open up Eclipse, open up Xcode, whatever you're building it with, get in there and start building some code, because that's the fun part, right? But if you want to reuse it, then we need to ask some questions about it before we start. So, why are we doing it? Who's it for? What do they want? And how will they use it? Kind of standard things. The interesting thing with UI controls is, in actual fact, we have 2 users, or 2 user groups, hopefully more than 2 users. Then you've not only got all of the people who are using your app, or not your app, using the app. So they're the people who are going to open up the app and then want to know, how do I change this value on this knob? So I put my finger on it and I move it around. But you also have the developers. Now that might be you in 6 months' time if this is a UI control that you've built. It could be people that you've sold your controls to. It could be people who've downloaded the open source of it. But they need to be able to use it as well. So that's the kind of the API aspect of your user base. So we've got to always try to remember that we've got these 2 user groups. How do we work with them together? So for example, with the knob control I was talking about, it's going to be an iOS control. This is because I'm primarily an iOS developer. I've set a circular version of the iOS slider, so that's just the single slider thing, but I want a circular version. It's got to play nice with iOS 7, just because, and it's got to have customizable payloads. Now these aren't really very specific, and if you were actually building something, you'd want a bit more detail. What do I mean by customizable experience? Do I mean I want to be able to make it look like a banana? I don't know. So we need to be able to have a little bit more detail about that, but for the purposes of what I'm going to talk about, that's plenty. So once we've got some use cases, we've got to work out how it looks. And this is a little bit academic, this slide, but I think it's quite important when you're building controls. And this is the way in which the human visual system works. So we have, in a nutshell, we have 2 kind of processes going on between our eyes and our brain. We have this top-down process, which is what we use to be able to understand things. It's incredibly high level, it uses the higher brain functions, and we use it for doing things like reading text. It's quite slow, and it involves the stuff that you've learned since you were born. But we also have this other process, which is called a bottom-up process, which is much more low level. It's it's kind of built into our lower visual cortex. Everybody can do it, and we all do it without noticing it, and we can't not do it. Yeah, that makes sense. So what I've drawn here is some kind of indications of what that actually means. If you look at the kind of the dots on the left-hand side, your eye will automatically be drawn to the one that's darker, and you can't stop that. You can move it after it's been originally drawn to that, but because of the way your eyes work, you'll be drawn to that. Same with the colour difference and the orientation difference. Your eye will be drawn to the area that is slightly different. Size and position also slightly less so, but you do get those 3 over on that side there are really quite inherent in the way that we visualise things. For example, in this picture in the background here, I can tell you that when you first saw it, your eye would be drawn to that kind of blob and then this stuff down in the bottom, because we've got some quite big colour differences, and we've got some quite impressive kind of lines, orientation differences against the smooth background. What the hell does that mean from what we're talking about in UI controls? Well, if we're going to be building this as a circular slider type thing, then we could go with this, right? That's circular, it's got a value underneath, but it's not really intuitive how to use it, and B, what the value is. You've got to read the text. I've said that that's the thing that's top down. It requires you to actually think about what you're doing. You might not realise you're thinking about it, but you are thinking about reading the text. And you've no idea of the range. And also, if you were shown that, how the hell would you use it? I mean, where would you put your fingers? Not obvious, right? So we can use that hue difference thing I was talking about. So we put a different colour on there. Our eye's automatically drawn to that blob now. So now we've got some idea that probably we need to stick our finger there. However, we've still no idea of what the range is of this thing that we can move to change the value. So maybe we get rid of the continuous circle and we split it out into this kind of track type thing. Now we're using this hue difference to be able to determine where the blob is, and we've got this idea of a range which is kind of coming out at us because of these angular differences at the end. And then in my decision for the way that I actually built this, I went for orientation difference instead, entirely pretty much out of personal preference. That one would have worked, but I think that one looks better, and I'm right. Okay, so now once you've got some kind of idea of what it's going to look like and what it's going to do, then we need to think about actually building it. I've got a few facts about what your API is in terms of UI control, so I'll talk about those for a little bit. I don't mean this to be a list of do this, do this, do this, don't do this, but that's probably what it's going to turn into. So I'll try and make it a bit more useful than that. Your API is world visible. What do I mean by that? Well, that's the thing that people are going to judge your control on, or indeed you're going to judge yourself on. That's the thing that people are going to read when they come to use it. They don't want to have to dig around all the source code and things. They just want to be able to take your API and then understand what it is that you're talking about. So it's quite important that we get this right. It's hard to change. Well, it's not hard to change. You can just deprecate some things and add some new things. But what do I mean by that? I mean that we've got to think about it up in front. I apologise for the fact it's cutting off the edge of the screen, and I also apologise for the fact that it's all Objective-C code. So for those of you who aren't Objective-C people, then it's pretty obvious. So for example, I was building a volume knob that I talked about before, and I've stuck some things on here. I've got a volume, a min volume, and a max volume, because that's what I need, right? I need to be able to set these different things on my control. 6 months later, I decided actually I really liked that slider thing that I had, but now I'm building an app that has different layers in it, and I want to change their opacity. So now I've got opacity, min opacity, max opacity. How am I going to use my old control? Do I add these properties? Do I rename them? Do I create a fork of it and then have another go? What we should have done is originally thought, actually this is quite hard to change, we should come up with something which makes sense for actually the control that we've got, not just the use case that we have at the moment. It's testable. Now that sounds a bit weird because it's just an API, but it is testable. Or you can write some tests on it based on the functionality. So UI is notoriously difficult to test, right? But there is some functionality that we can test. For example, in a slider knob type thing, we've got a value and we've got max value and min value. What happens if I set the value outside the range? What happens if I change the range whilst I have a value so it's no longer in range? We can decide on that behaviour and write those tests before we have any implementation or anything like that, which then means that we're doing a little bit of test-driven development. Quite like that, that's cool. So we can write these tests once we have an API. And finally, it's documentation. This goes back to the world visible thing, right? We've got this thing that people are going to be able to look at to be able to understand how to use our control. Well, let's give them a bit more help. Rather than just naming our properties, for example, we could put some detail in what's their default values, what do they do, what do they represent, that kind of thing. So that gives us a little bit more help. Okay, so now having listed some facts about our API, I'm going to tell you what we should do with it. It should be discussed and iterated. What do I mean by this? Well, for the control I showed you before, these are two possible approaches for the way that we visualize it. So the correct way, or the way that I came up with, is that you have a start angle for it, an end angle, and then a width of how wide that little line is and how long the little thing that comes out the side. But you could ask somebody else and they say, actually, I want to set a position for the start, a position for the end, an inner radius for the line, and then an outer radius, so we set the width, plus the pointer length. Now these are two perfectly valid, one's correct because I came up with it, but there are two perfectly valid approaches here. What we don't want to do is finish building our control and then somebody say, oh, I want to use that instead. Well, no. If we've done that, this is back to it being difficult to change. If we've left it until that point, then all our tests will start failing. We'll have demo apps and things will start failing. Maybe we should have done this early on, which leads us nicely onto we should create it early for precisely that reason. It should be minimal. Well, again, this is kind of going back to the same kind of thing again. I could come up with something like this, right? Where we could have a colour at the beginning of the track, a colour at the end of the track, they could have a gradient between them, we could have a colour in the middle going out and a gradient to the side. We could specify what shape the track is, loads of different things, every possible use case you could ever imagine. But that means that it's really quite complicated to use, it means it's really quite complicated for people to understand, and in reality all we need for this control that we've got here is a value, a min value and a max value. We need some other things for how to actually display it, but from the point of view of its functionality, that's all we need. And then finally, platform friendly. So whatever you're building, it should match the platform. So I've talked about that I want a circular version of UI Slider. If you look at UI Slider, it's got another couple of methods on it, well, a method and a property, that are kind of relevant. Now if we implement these as well, then it means that any developers coming to use it will kind of expect these things, and then they'll be able to understand exactly how it works without having to kind of go and learn something new. So if we just match exactly the way that the platform works, then it will make some sense. Cool. So now we have an API. We've got some tests that are failing. It's nicely documented. Everybody's happy with it. It's nice and minimal. However, it doesn't work, because I said the tests are failing, we haven't actually got anything behind it. So we should have a look at how do we actually build this thing. And there's a few little considerations that I've put together that we should pay attention to for this aspect. First one is appropriate subclassing. Again, this depends massively on your platform, but for an example with iOS, I want to build my UI control. Pretty much at the very top we've got UI Responder. That'll give me the ability to respond to events, so looking at keyboard and touch events, but then I can't do any drawing. So that's where UI View comes in. Now I can draw on the screen. Brilliant, I can do some drawing. But how do I get any feedback to the developer? Well, there are ways around it, and I'll talk about those in a second, but in actual fact UI Control is a perfect example for this, because it gives me the something pattern, which I've completely forgotten the name of. I'll come back to that in just a second when it's written on the screen. So I'm going to inherit from that, because that makes sense. Now this is very specific for this particular platform, but what I'm suggesting is that we should pay attention and make sure that whatever platform we're on, we've understood exactly what we should subclass. Interaction pattern, exactly the same kind of thing again. Target action, that was the thing I was looking for. This is how do our developers, or how do our people using our control actually interact with it? How do they get feedback from the touch events? There are many different ways you can do this on iOS, and similarly other platforms as well. So I'm not going to go through pretty much what they are, but the ones that I've chosen for the code that I've written for the knob controllers: target action, which is the stuff that comes out of UI control. So there you're kind of saying, there's a method on it which says, let me know when this value changes, and then you'll get a callback, which is kind of exactly what we want. And KVO as well, which is precisely for monitoring value changes on properties and inner subjects. Command is kind of using block-based things, so that's anonymous functions, and then delegation is very popular in the iOS world and used for UI overview, etc. There are other things as well, but these are the kind of a quick summary of the things. And the important thing is that you've thought about it and it matches exactly the way that people would expect to use it, and it copes with any issues that you might have. Separation of concerns. This is just good software development. So I'm suggesting we've got this API at the top, which is kind of the gatekeeper of our control. Within that, then we don't just want some massive great class that contains everything, so can we split it out? The appearance, for example, so in the control that I've written, we've got a renderer class which deals with the drawing on the screen, which in actual fact you could reuse somewhere else if you wanted if you happen to want some kind of arc shape with a little thing on top of it. Interaction, so this is kind of build a gesture recognizer if you've got custom gestures. and logic. So if you've got a big data source type thing, then you might want something to manage your data source or something like that. So it's just good software engineering, but it applies to UI controls as well. And this will help in the future when you come back to it and wonder, how the hell did I make that work? Or actually I used this drawing technique in a control I wrote before. I don't want to have to go and try and extract it because I've just got this handy class I can pull out and use elsewhere. And finally, match the platform is back again. Again, make sure that you understand the platform and build it appropriately. For example, with iOS, how the hell do we draw on the screen? These are 4 different ways that you could draw on the screen. What are we going to use for the control that we've got at the moment? And just to kind of give you an example of the way that it does work is, I'm using CA layer rendering, CA layers, core animation layers. They're incredibly good at animating, hence their name. And very good at doing things like transforming. So if I build my control out of these 2 layers, so we've got the background track and then we've got the little thing on top of it, and overlay them, then it has the right effect. But then when I want to change the value, rather than having to redraw the entire thing, all I have to do is rotate the top layer, which, as I said, is incredibly efficient. So it's just being able to understand the platform and make sure that the approach that you take uses the features that are required. So I'll show you, if I can, how what I've built looks like. If I can find my mouse. So after all this, then I can't find the mouse. Here we go. Then this is the controller I built. It does kind of exactly what you'd expect it to as you move around. Then it updates the value. We've got, as I said, I'm using 2 different techniques for being able to talk back. We've got KVO for one of them. We've got target action for the other one, just to demonstrate the 2 things. This is a UI slider, so that's talking back to it as well. And then this is the setting the value as well. It will just accept different values. And that method that I showed you that UI slider has that I hadn't got but then added was the ability to animate between values, which is what this does now, so it animates between them. And that's just very, very simple bit of code that animates the rotation of the upper layer that this little knob part is on. It's gone very small, can't read. Right, so the code for that is all on my GitHub if anybody cares to look at it. It's, feel free to use it for Git. There are various issues with it. I've raised some of them, there are other issues as well. But that kind of goes through, so I built that as using this process where I went through all of these different bits and pieces. It all sounds like a lot of work. And it is. To do all of this is quite hard work because you start out with your use cases, you do all of that guff about the API. Just the discussions about APIs take days and days of people bickering about spellings and things. So what alternatives are there? Well, in the iOS world, then there's CocoaPods, which is basically dependency management. They have some really quite cool pods on there for, including various UI control pods. So when I searched for knob, and a couple of them came up that you can just drop in and very easy to use to drop into your app. However, it's not a very visual interface to be able to look at them, which is where CocoaControls comes in. It gives you a visual library of the different things that you can get hold of, and those are my search results for knob. I'm quite pleased in many respects that the thing that I built doesn't look like any of these, because then that means that I didn't waste my time. And then finally, these are the people I work for, so I should mention them. We build controls, hence why I can talk about how to build controls. As I said, we've got the charting stuff and this kind of control, although we don't sell this, because I've just written it, you can have it. The Essentials thing, which is a suite of 6 or 7 controls that are a little bit like this, a little bit more complex. Cool. Go and build some, they're fun, honest. As I said, I'll stick the codes on my GitHub. I'll stick the slides online as well so that you can grab them. They'll be on my tweet. Hello.
Yeah, hey. So do you allow, or does the ShinobiControls allow you to work with like cross-platform
So
stuff like that, or is it just strictly how just do this native and?
So at the moment, so yeah, we're the reason our controls are all native. Now we have at the moment, so charts, grids, and essentials are all iOS, and charts is just about to be Android as well. The reason they're native is because of we started out doing charting, and we wanted to be able to do a hell of a lot of data points, tens, hundreds of thousands of data points. Now, if you try and do that in a kind of cross-platform HTML5 JavaScript way, it'll fall over on your mobile device. If you're not doing many points, then yeah, go for it. There are some really cool HTML JavaScript libraries, but it doesn't work for vast amounts of data points. So we built it so that it's OpenGL accelerated, and that will be on both iOS and Android very, very soon. So yes, it is kind of cross-platform, but you do have to develop two apps. We do have Xamarin bindings for both of them. I don't know if anybody uses Xamarin. But they're all of our controls are Xamarin. Nice, they play nice with Xamarin. They've all got bindings. So in that respect, it can be cross-platform. Yeah.
What is the licensing for your controls?
It's per developer, and once you have a license, you can build as many apps as you like. You can do what you like with it, but it is per developer. So that's the way it works. You can download, as I said, you can download trials of them all on the website and give them a go. And see what you like. If you don't like them, then let me know, because we build them for guys like you. So if they're crap, then let me know, because then we can make them better, or go home and cry. I don't know. Cool. Well, thank you very much for listening to me.